Today on the Social Corner.
One day, stretched my hand out and I noticed, light as I am, my mum's hand was white. I felt I'd constructed a social persona of being confident and I was intelligent. So the community and everybody else around me bought that. All of my past, personally, professionally, culturally, was hidden. And I had to go and find it. Well, imagine if our young people could find out their past quicker, then you wouldn't end up like this.
Hello and welcome to the Social Corner with me, Daina Anderson Mpunzi. My guest today is a highly esteemed criminologist and Winston Churchill Fellow with a career spanning more than 35 years in criminal justice. A three-time author, his books have sparked debate and interest globally and fueled conversations around race, masculinity and crime. I'm so glad he's joining me today. Welcome to the show, Dr. Glynn.
Greetings. That sounds really good, that introduction.
It's all true though.
What are you talking about?
I really struggle to get down the accolades and the achievements of some of the guests, and yours was even worse. It was like, how do I get this into a little, but there's so much to you, and we'll be getting to that as we go through the interview. How does it feel hearing yourself spoken about in that way?
Personally speaking, I kind of feel very distant from it. I remember watching Beyonce when she talked about Sasha Fierce and her alter ego. And I think for me, I've kind of regressed into being what I was like at school. I was very quiet. I feel my academic side is my alter ego. I think the work I've done in prisons. So in some respects, it's weird. I sometimes think who they're talking about. I mean, I've been introduced. I remember I was on the Moral Maze on Radio 4. I was the main speaker. But the moment they mention my name, I'm like wondering who they're talking about. Mm-hmm. So I find it difficult to cope with what I've created. That's why I said I don't really read my books. I don't really watch myself on TV. I don't engage with anything about
I actually met you at school, secondary school. And I remember being, at that time, growing up in an all-white neighbourhood, going to a predominantly all-white school and having all-white teachers. I don't actually remember any other teachers. And then one day, my English teacher wasn't there. And we rock up to English. And there's this teacher who I've never seen before, wearing a dashiki hat. Like, I think it was like, those little... And I remember thinking, what is going on? Right. And you were teaching us English, you were taking the class. And I thought, okay, this is a one-off, because don't see this in the school. And then I think you taught me straight for a couple of months. And I never forget you. You were Mr. Glynn at the time. Yeah. And, I went on to do so many different things, but came as I've grown up and realised, saw your work coming into the social sphere that I was now starting to understand. I'm thinking, hold on a second, I remember lessons with you. And I think what struck me about you in class was you just said stuff. You kind of had a real taste and understanding of the flavour of the text and everything that we were talking about or studying at the time, which was not like many of the other teachers. Do you remember that time at all?
Listen, it's vivid because I said to you when we reconnected, because you asked me that question. You said, when you contacted me, you said, do you remember? I said, yeah. Because I just remembered at school, it's just how white it was. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about that from the kids. The kids were diverse. I mean, there was a lot of diverse kids. Yeah. But when you go in as a facilitator in a school, it's the staff room. I just remember walking in the staff room, and coming from my background, you had all the stereotype teachers, the stress teacher, the elderly white teacher 2 months from retirement. But I come in, and as usual, you get introduced by the head teacher in really banal ways, you know what I mean? Because it was like, Martin's here to work with the English department. So obviously, English department, it's important, it's necessary. And then they're looking at me as if they're trying to look behind me like, yeah, where's the person you're talking about? And the interesting thing is, when I first went in there was a lot of, so you know about Shakespeare? And you have read Charles Dickens? I said, yeah, but I've also read about the lyrics of Bob Marley and the Beatles. And so I said, I just love words. So when I went into the classroom, what I remember vividly is a lot of the working class kids who were just what the school saw as unruly. They weren't the top set kids. But when I went in, they paid attention because my persona was, yo, listen, we come from the city. Well, he sounds like me. But remember the first time I saw you, you were taller than everybody else in the class. That was the first thing. You was much taller, right? But you was like probably the most mature person in the class. You weren't loud, you weren't brash. My first memory of yourself is somebody who was incredibly mature. That's what it came across like. And one of the things that kind of struck me, because we used to speak at school, because I used to think, what is it like being the only black person in this place? So my first memory of yourself was somebody who was very mature, probably slightly distant, because if I was looking at it from your point, I would think, what the hell?
That is literally what was going for me. Because the other thing about that time for me was, because that was my normal, I was from nursery to infant school to secondary school, it was my normal to be in that kind of environment and not see diversity or not see black teachers. When you walked in, it was like, hold on a second. There's me, like there's what are you going to do? What are you going to say? What are you going to contribute to this lesson? And I remember kind of like looking to my friends and kind of listening to what they had to say.
But I was also, the thing I remember vividly, because when you're in a class which is predominantly with one black person, because that's the way I grew up at school, but you're very self-conscious of that black person being in the room. Do you reinforce the stereotype? Because I was thinking, if I screw up here, think what's going to happen to this individual. But then on the flip side, think, well, hold on a minute, stuff this, because maybe she needs to feel that someone that she can say, all right, I can't be like him, but that's the way we are. And I always remember it. And so when you got in touch all those years later, the first thing I said to you, of course I remember you. And I pinpointed, all I did is say, you were the biggest person in the class, right? But you was the tallest.
So
but it was you was the tallest, because I can't remember when I met you, if you was in year 7 or 8. But I remember, year 7 and 8 pupils, they were like small.
I was actually, I think it was about year 9 that I met you.
Yeah, so what I'm saying, all the kids were small, but you stood out. And it wasn't a kind of derogatory thing. It was more about you stood out because the temperament, your personality, you was very quiet, but you paid attention. And I always remember, right, we walked past each other in the corridor and stuff like this. So when I found out you was making films, for me, it reminds me one of the key things about how the pivotal points in our lives when you have an encounter with someone. In the philosophy of black self-concept, there's a thing called negrescence. And negrescence starts with what we call the 5 stages of developing a black consciousness. And the first one is the pre-encounter. Somebody does have an awareness of blackness, but they have an encounter and it triggers them. Malcolm X was a classic example. He was a gangster, he went to jail, and he became Malcolm X from Malcolm Little. What you had is an encounter.
Can you, in layman's terms, because I'm not an academic, but try and break down to me this thing that I've been through, this negrescence?
Negrescence.
Yeah.
Just means...
Because I had no idea that's what happened to me.
Yeah, I mean, when Shakespeare wrote Othello, one of the things I discovered with Othello, because it's relevant to this, is that Othello was always played by a white guy, blacking his face up. Now, Othello was a Moor. In the Elizabethan times, on the Globe stage, everybody portrays Othello as this thug, he's aggressive. But in Shakespeare's time, a white guy would put black makeup on. On the Globe, if you stand at the back of the Globe, you couldn't see the gestures on the face because it was too dark. It was almost pitch black makeup. So in order for the actor to convey the words of Shakespeare, they had to gesture and become across more aggressive because they couldn't see the facial expression, not unlike King Lear or Hamlet. So as far back as the Elizabethan period, the assumption of black people being aggressive and the way that we look and sound and whatever, and that carried on through slavery. So African-American psychologists came up with two very important areas. One's called black rage, which was what we call now microaggressions. But black rage is based on a legal defense in 1846, where a black guy called William Freeman murdered 4 white people and was found not guilty on the basis of racist abuse. It wasn't called racism back then. If you fast forward to around about the late 60s in the civil rights movement, you had the Black Power movement. It was a sense of black is beautiful. So the Black Power movement started, it was Afro. It was about, let's go back to Africa. Marcus Garvey started that, you might as well say. What psychologists were realizing during segregation, with the Ku Klux Klan racism, you suddenly got a proliferation of crime. You suddenly started to get, W.D. Griffiths, The Birth of a Nation, cinema, radio, racist stereotypes everywhere. So a group of psychologists came together and started to look more critically at black self-concept. What is the concept a black person has of themselves? They started to do some research and started to look at how do people go from an ignorance of blackness to somehow having a positive self-concept. Because a lot of the way black people inhabit their bodies is visual. It's visual, whether it's hair, clothes. So negrescence came about, and this was one of kind of many. But what's interesting about negrescence, it had 5 stages, and it was called pre-encounter, encounter, immersion, internalization, commitment. So the pre-encounter is an individual with no sense of blackness, an individual in the school, predominantly white community. So you internalize that, and that's your reality. We internalize what we experience, and it's called the labeling theory. When you tell a child they're stupid long enough, what do? Become stupid. So if you tell black people you're this long enough, it's deterministic, it's self-fulfilling prophecy, you become that. So for me, what I'm suggesting is why what you're doing is important, because the visual imagery you're presenting on these platforms is communicating to people in care, people in that rural community, people in that village. So therefore, this production, what you're doing, moves way beyond a cultural product. It's a documentary. This is about shaping the values and beliefs and ideas about who you see yourself as.
Tell me a little bit about you growing up.
Well, quite simply, I made someone cry over this recently. I was being interviewed for this project, and they said that normally when we interview people, they cry. And when I finished, he was the one that was crying. If you're under a certain age, around about 1955, there was signs put outside people's houses: no dogs, no Irish, no blacks, no colours. My mum gave me my baby book when she died, and I looked on it. And the first thing I noticed in the baby book, from the age of, up to the age of 2, I lived in 6 houses. I was born in 1957. In August 1958, we had the race riots. My father was in it, he disappeared. I never saw him again for 30 years later. So between 0 and 2, I lived in 6 houses. We were on the move, because what would happen is my mum would, different from nowadays, when you had a white woman who slept with a Jamaican, and I'm specifically emphasizing Jamaican because that's what it was predominantly like in the 50s. It meant that in the hospital, the father was never allowed to come in and pay a baby. She was never allowed to visit. So she had me on her own. And the interesting thing is my mum could only live with black people, because when she slept with my father, she was unmarried, which was unthinkable. A lot of white women at the time, you see these TV programs, they had the child took away. My mum chose to keep me. So up to the age of 2, we was on the move every 4 or 5 months. And I asked her one day, I said, what was it like? She said she'd leave me in a pram. We never pushed chairs back then, it was pram. So you had to leave it out of the way. And on the house, it would say, families welcome. Rooms available, families welcome. So my mum was a white woman, would leave me behind the wall, knock on the door, and the woman would come out. Probably it was landladies.
Right.
And they'd say, yes, we've got rooms, please. And she says, I've got a child. No problem. Bring me out. That's it. So that was my first 2 years. Between 3 and 5, it was the same thing. It was like being nomadic. Then my mom met this white guy, come back from the war. He'd fought against Mussolini in Africa. Mm. He's living in a street called Martin Street in St. Anne's, which was one of the last modern day slums. Most people nowadays, they wouldn't know what a slum is. It was cobbled streets, back-to-back housing. We had no electricity. We had electricity downstairs, no fridge, no bathroom. So between, I'd say, 2 and 6, I used to go public baths. Now, I didn't know what public, I just thought everybody went public baths. It's only when I got to school, I realized only poor people, I had to go to a bath that everybody could use. Yeah. One outside toilet for 4 families, right? And it was disgusting, cobbled streets. So when I, up to the age of about 7, my mum never really made me feel poor. The stigma didn't come from my mum. It came from people around us. My stepfather, who was white, was racist. He was physically abusive, and he had a son. So from 7 to 11, I get racism in the house, out the house, on the bus, everywhere, 24/7.
So you've got, how old was his son? His
son was about 8 or 9 years older than me. And yeah, well, when I first met him, we'd moved from the slum. Mm-hmm. We moved to an area called Snetton Dale.
Where is this?
It's in Nottingham. It's in Nottingham. And my stepfather was strange because he actually had custody of 2 of his sons. Mm-hmm. So when we moved to this house, it was me, I had a sister, and then my brother moved in, and he became brutal like my dad. So I was getting beatings, kicked, punched. And I remember, I didn't know I was black at the time. I didn't know I had a different color skin. Mm-hmm. And what happened is, with my mum, one day, I stretched my hand out, and I noticed, light as I am, my mum's hand was white. So when I was at school, the names that I'd be called at school, I was called all sorts of names by black kids and white kids. And I went in the house one day and I said to my mum, my stepfather's in there, and I said, they called me nigger at school. And he said, well, that's what you are. And then the word nignog came about. And then I remember every Sunday we having to watch TV programs with the black and white minstrel show. I had to watch that because he loved it. Alf Garney. So I'm sitting in a house full of white people, getting racist abuse, what it would be called racist abuse now, but in the house. So I left home when I was 12. I couldn't hack it.
You left home?
I just walked out.
Without your mum?
Yeah, I walked out. I couldn't take it. I just couldn't take being in the house. You know, when you walk out, you don't know where you're going. You've seen these movies where somebody has a stop. I went and stopped with my friends. I got brought back, but what happened is I reached what was called the liminal phase at the age of 14. I was no longer year 7 and 8. I wanted to be like the older ones. So my stepfather, the conflict between us, it just got worse. It got to a point where on a table eating food, he'd say to my mum, can you tell your son to pass me the salt? And I'd say, well, tell your husband if he wants it, come and get it. And then I'd pick a knife up, and suddenly, and then from 14, I discovered reggae music, and sound system.
Now, I want to just stop there for a second because I want to go link this to what you were talking about with, I've forgotten the word. Negrescence. And that concept that when you've kind of seen yourself, would you almost say that you saw a negative version of yourself in the things like the minstrels and things like that?
I hated it. What happened with me in the house, I watched the minstrels, I watched all these racist programs.
And how did you internalize that? How did you identify it?
It was a strange crisis because on one level I was watching Alf Garney, but on another level I was watching Pelly, Gary Sobers. I was seeing black men on TV, predominantly black men, and I said they meant something. I mean, when I talk about they meant something, I used to have a haversack. I don't know if they call him that now, but I had a haversack. And my favourite cricketer was Gary Sobers. He was the West Indies captain. I put a pen with Gary Sobers' name on my knapsack, right? Muhammad Ali. I tried to talk like Muhammad Ali because he just had this gift. Pelly. So alongside all of this name calling, there was this huge amount of black people. Motown. I remember when the first time I heard Papa was a Rolling Stone. I want to be like Motown singers. When I saw Michael Jackson, I wanted to have an Afro. So I had this really strong awareness that look at all these black people, but I'm in a white house taking racism.
Were you finding that you wanted to identify with them because you knew you were black?
Yeah, but there's where it started to go wrong, because at school, I was in the grammar stream. I was in the top class at school, and all the black kids were lower.
Right.
So what would happen is, don't ask me how this happens, but I used to hear black people speak, and I just wanted to speak like that. They'd say things like, "Wow, go on, brethren," and I'm like, I want to speak like that. So I used to eavesdrop. I used to stand. There'd be a group of black people, right? I'd be outside listening, and I thought, rock, paper, scissors. I'm going to try today to say it. So I'd say it really badly, and every black person would walk off. I'm like, am I doing something wrong? I couldn't speak it. Food-wise, they'd take me to the house, and elderly Jamaican men would mime to me. They say, "Hello, son, how are you doing?" And I'd say, "Why are you speaking to me like that?" And then they'd speak in a real fast Jamaican accent. I couldn't understand it. So I realized I couldn't speak the language, and I felt inadequate.
How long were you out of the house for? How long were you away? Or did you ever go back?
A few days.
But
I was brought back, and the moment I was brought back, the boundaries had changed. When I look back on it now, the disconnect between me and my stepfather was acute, me and the family. So I remember one time I was showed how to cook rice and peas. Imagine the discovery of cooking rice and peas.
Who showed you how to do that?
Black women. At the time, because I was going through a lot of distress, there was a group of black women that saw my mum couldn't manage me.
Right.
So they would bring me into that. And when you was running up, when black kids were running up and down the house, they weren't in the kitchen with the parents, I was showed how to cook and manage my skin and stuff like this. So one day I said, I'm going to cook rice and peas. And my stepfather come in and he threw it in the bin. And from that happened, I never ate at home again. Never ate at home again. And then what happened overnight, that moment, that tipping point moment, I felt vengeful. I used to run with the man's them. And then I discovered reggae music. And what reggae music did, it gave me a space in the dark with bass lines and beats where for the first time ever, everybody looked like me. Everybody sounded like me. I didn't have to defend my racial existence. And then from I was in that space, the conflict was when I went back into the house because I just couldn't function, because it's what the boys calls double consciousness. I was a black youth at night. I started to change the way I dressed, like the youths that you see now. But then what happened is at 16 and a half, bam, I become a father. Because I had great sex education. I can't blame my mum for none of this. But what happened is, when I escaped into the world of the black community, I didn't have a sat nav for black life. All I knew is sound system, reggae music. I wasn't living in a house with black parents, black family. I didn't grow up with that.
Did you find yourself trying to overcompensate for your blackness at the time?
On every level. I went to a barber's, used to go white barbers. I don't like calling them white and black barbers, but I have to say it in this context. It was a barbers, white guys, great barbers. And when I used to go to the barber, I sit there waiting. It's like next, come on. My mum would be there. My mum always with me. And, we don't like our mums being with us, but when you're mixed race and your mum's white, everybody took my mum. People used to think she was a prostitute, or who did she sleep with? It's like that. Anyway, I'd get in the chair and he'd cut my hair and then he put Brill cream on it. And I always remember in winter at school, I noticed the black kids had either no hair, which I thought was cool, but I always noticed the texture of black men's hair. I used to go and I feel like I'm a white person that said, "Can I come and touch your hair?" But my hair wasn't the same. And I remember saying to my mum, "Mum, I want hair like that. How can I get it like that?" And my mum couldn't say, "You wasn't born with hair like that." She goes, "Look, I like your curls." I mean, don't tell me about curls. I want my hair to be like this. And what I realized, what I was asking for, I wanted to be like my dad. So I realized that, and I remember watching the 1968 Black Power salute. And that meant something to me. So in my house, when I had an afro, my stepfather hated it because he knew what it meant.
It was Because with the
Yeah, my stepfather fought against Mussolini in Africa.
yeah.
He was a soldier. He was a person that was there at the birth of unions. So the moment I come in with a black identity, with an afro, I knew that it would upset him. I didn't really know what it meant. I mean, I saw black power in the 60s. I didn't really know what it meant. I was about 10 and 11. It wound him up. And that conflict made him more hostile towards me. I scared my brothers and sisters. So I needed a place where this was okay. It was never okay in the house. And at school, one of my form teachers was South African under apartheid. And I was I was the only black person in the class. He used to give me a tough time. So what happened is I needed to find a place for this because I found myself becoming angry, vexed, and violent. I developed a kind of, what I said in Aggressance. I had the encounter. I have numerous encounters, but the big encounter, suddenly I realized I was different. And my thing was, if I'm different, if you think I'm aggressive, so is deterministic. I said, if you think I'm aggressive, I'm going to behave aggressive. So I behaved aggressive. You think I'm going to do this? So I then began, I worked at 16, I worked in a factory. And it was old style apprenticeship. The oldest man in the factory, I worked with him for 4 years. When I was there, I got white guys who were racist. And I remember, I just remembered two distinct incidents. One, I walked into the factory, the only black person on the shop floor. I remember there's tools, there's weapons, there's everything in there. And this guy come up to me and he goes, see them two over there, they've been slagging you off behind your back. So what have they been saying? I said the N-word. I seen a guy in a drilling machine. He was on a drilling machine doing some metal. And I said, I'm going to, see, look, I don't drill a hole in your hand. And I was serious. And then I left that place because because I threatened a few people. I just said, yo, because it's not, listen, I couldn't fight. I just had no fear. That's what people don't understand about violence. I didn't have no fear. What are you going to do? It was like that. So the day I finished my apprenticeship, they had foreman on the shop floor. He got me in the office. And he said, you threatened a couple of people. And I'd say, stick your job, piss off, get stuff. I had my I just left. I went to work at Raleigh. And I started working in a drawing office. And I wanted a better quality of job because at Raleigh, all the black people worked in the factory. I wanted to be in the office. I had aspirations that I want to be in the office. I'm in the office, only black person in the office. It followed me your whole life. Black person in the office, job, but I had to wear a suit and I had to wear a tie because I was a draftsman. And it's like what you do at school. When you got a tie on, people like to tighten it up. This guy comes up to me and I'm in a room full of white people I didn't like. I mean, I'm not going to lie. And I used to call them white people because they reminded me of my stepfather. They were racist, they were bigoted, but I just wouldn't allow them to get, so I used to threaten them. There's a guy come up and he started strangling me with a tie. And there was a desk and it had a compass on it. I told him, don't do it. So he did it twice and he was pinned his hand to the table, the compass. Gosh. And that was when I was about 20. So from I get that, and then when I was listening to reggae music and the streets and stuff, suddenly I feel like Batman in the Avenging Angel.
In that Batman mode, because I want to talk a bit more about some of the other things that have shaped your identity, but just like literally in one word, was that rage that yeah. you were feeling? So at this point,
it wasn't anger, it was rage.
Part of your identity is rage.
Rage.
And that is associated with your blackness.
Yeah, and it was reinforced when my brothers and sisters at the time, they were young. My mum would say, "You just like your dad." Wow. That's what mum would say, "She's just like your dad." So what would happen is, I became what they told me I'd become. They said, black men equals aggression. Yeah. And nobody sat me down and said, "You can't do this, it's wrong." Black men just encouraged me to be more violent.
That's interesting.
When I was growing up, it was like cut him, stab him, beat him up. It was never, you're hurt. Women would say that, "Look, son, you know the white man's thing." And I'd say, "No, they're cruel, they're nasty, they're horrible." And I used to get angry because I was getting in the house and suddenly I couldn't get heard. So the rage is I went back to being a child because nobody wanted to hear that I was stuck in the middle. When there was a fight break out, I'd had times when there was a fight break out, black and white people are fighting at school and I was told you can't get involved. So I was never allowed to fight at school because they said, "No, you're mixed race, you don't sit nowhere." So they'd fight each other, go and make friends again. Me, I'm left on my own. And that happened to a lot of people of my generation who are mixed race, who were told by black and white people, you can't get involved. And they still do.
And I think you're right, they still do, because I've got friends, even of my generation, who've spoken to me now about their experience as young guns. And it's the same thing. I didn't feel I was black enough, or I didn't feel I was white, you know. So there was this otherness.
Oh, it was terrible.
That fit nowhere in their eyes. I want to talk a bit more about your identity, because at the moment I've got rage.
Yep.
I've got, you know, the experiences of racism that you experience.
Yep.
But there's a big one playing a part for me, because you've mentioned it quite a few times. It's the fatherlessness, the absentee father, absentee black father. Because had your stepfather been another black man,
Probably been different.
would have been different. Talk to me a little bit about how that shaped your identity in those younger years.
Well,
not having a father around.
My stepfather, first and foremost, bad as he was incredibly well educated in terms of he read 10 books a week, he loved music. He gave me a lot of stuff. I'm not going to deny that. He was just brutal in the way that he dealt with me. I was always pining for my dad. I wrote a poem about it. I would go to my mum and say, I want to see my dad. Don't worry, he'll come one day. And I used to sit every Christmas, sitting looking out the window. Never came. And I was so depressed. I tried Cilla Black, surprise. I tried the Salvation Army, everything, because I didn't have a name on a birth certificate. So I didn't know, it was nothing. So when I got to the age of about 30, it got really bad, because my father's absence affected everything, relationships, everything. So I got to a point one night, I was so depressed, I was lying on the settee and a phone call comes through. And my mum says, found your dad. I went mad. I said, you known about this? She says, no. I found out that my sister, who worked for Social Security, typed his name in, and he was on invalidity benefit, and he was based in the UK. So, and he'd had a stroke. So I spoke to my friends. I said, I don't know what's going on. My mum phoned me, she said, I found your dad, which was a shock for her. My sister never told me. Then what I find out is I wanted to speak to him on the phone. My dad comes on the phone. I don't know what to say. I didn't know what to say. I also found out that the woman he'd been married to for 19 years from Trinidad, he told her that he didn't like white women and he didn't have any kids. So then his wife found about me for the first time. So I'm trying to counsel my mum, who's just found her ex-partner who ditched her. Oh, wow. I'm trying to accommodate my father, who wanted to apologize every minute. And then also deal with his wife, who suddenly was like, what, you've been out with a white woman and you got a mixed race child? So I'm absorbing all of this. So there's no chance for me to kind of stand back. And what I was going through, it was all these adults doing this. So my friend said, look, if he's had a stroke, you need to go and see him because he might die. So imagine this year, I met my dad first time in 30 odd years. I mean, I see all these TV programs, but when you've had no training, there wasn't no TV camera, it was just me. I went down and we sat. And I remember, it's no word of a lie, I met him and I met his wife, big house in London, they were in Essex. First and foremost, I thought, hold on, my dad's living in this huge house in London and we've been living in poverty. So we sat down there and I couldn't speak to him. And I remember he had a stroke and there were some pills rolled across the table. I said, son, pass. And I passed him. He said, I'm your father. I said, you can't say that. And I just remember we sat for 2 hours and never spoke. I just couldn't speak. And he said to me, how have you managed to succeed without me being there? I said, you didn't just leave me, you left my mum. And I just remembered, like, I couldn't believe it. I was just so overcome with everything. I went back to Birmingham and he told me, he gave me some addresses of my family in Jamaica. He said, I need you to go to Jamaica. So got the money, went to Jamaica. I was there in Jamaica 2 days. Now remember, this is a man I've only met once. We met 3 times in total, but the first time. Got in touch with Jamaica, arranged to go to Jamaica. So I got to Jamaica. second day, and the phone was from England. It was my father, and he just said, "You reached Jamaica?" I said, "Yeah." And he said goodbye. It was one of them, and he went upstairs and died. And when I got back, the worst thing that could have happened is, because I was very prominent as a poet, the voice picked up on it. So suddenly, me and Lemsi say, because Lemsi say he also had an experience in Ethiopia, suddenly the press caught on that I met my dad for the first time. So suddenly it becomes public knowledge. And I went to a spiral of decline, and to a point where I had to write a radio play for Radio 4 about meeting my father in the afterlife, because I wanted to ask him some questions and I couldn't ask him because he's dead. I never went to the funeral. I stayed in Jamaica. I chose not to go. And because I thought I need to meet my family. And when I was in Jamaica, there was a lot of strange things that took place. I was on a bus one day in Jamaica, and this man just bawled out. He just bawled out. I'm on the bus, a minibus in Jamaica, rural Jamaica. And he just said, "Ashley, son." And I suddenly realized, light-skinned as I was, I looked like a huge part of the family in Jamaica. So suddenly I went from racism, abusive stuff, absent father, connecting with him, going to Jamaica and then getting rejected whilst I was in Jamaica. So when I came back, it was 10 times worse, because internally I thought, where do I fit in? Where?
And you're 30 at this point.
I'm in my 30s. My child's growing up. And that was the point when I retreated to black literature, because I couldn't get the answers from nobody.
So your dad's passed away.
Yep.
You've been rejected by your Jamaican family.
Yep.
Your English family.
Yep.
And now your dad, who had received you, is gone.
Gone.
So there's still an empty space.
I would say it was beyond empty. It was just a void.
Void.
Because I can admit this. I failed my test 10 times. And
what test?
My driving test.
Your driving test.
Now, when I met my father, the one thing I wanted to do is driving. It was like I wanted to drive in the car. He died. And I remember I passed my test on the basis that, it just suddenly happened. But what happened is that I became an orphan. Everything I wanted to know about my dad, so I went back to Jamaica a second time. I kept going back, but each time I went back, when I came back the first time, I was on a feature film writing program. This time I wanted to write scripts. Didn't know what to do, but I wanted to tell my mum's story, because I'd written a play for Central Television about the 1958 race riots that we had produced. So I suddenly wanted to tell my mum's story. So I wrote a story, and it was fictitious, but it was about my mum. Mike Lee wrote a film called Secrets and Lies, and Marianne John Baptiste, she was the lead character in it, about a white woman who had a mixed race child, and she didn't look mixed race, too dark for that part. But anyway, so I said, I'm going to tell my mum's story, white woman. So I needed to create a motivation. So two things happened is I started writing the script, but I needed a character motivation for a movie, unlike TV. So I said, imagine if a white woman has got cancer and she's got 6 months left to live, and she has to find her first love and ask him that question, did you love me? That was it. So I phoned my mum, and I said, Mum, there's two things missing. I said, how did my dad leave you? I never asked her, and he never told me. So I've written 120 pages. I've got this film that was better. I think it was better than Mike Lee's, but I needed one thing. There was a catalytic scene right at the beginning of the film to show how my mum and dad got together. And she told me. And I had the script in my hand. And she told me she went to see my dad, come out the mother and baby home. She knocked on the door. And she said to these Jamaican women, have you seen Ashley? That was my dad. She said, Ashley not here. So my mum turned around, she just come out the mother and baby home. She wanted to show me to him for the first time. Come out the mother and baby home. And there's a hill in Nottingham. There was a car. And he was leaning up against the car with a suitcase. with this guy. And my mum called to him with me. He just turned around and drove off. When my mum told me that, I was devastated. I said, he left you like that. You called to him and he left, and I was in a, you know. So what happened is, I said, I'm going to write the movie anyway. I'm going to put that scene in. 6 months later, Mum gets cancer. So I thought. And it was called Marjorie's Poem, because my mum, when she died, wrote me a poem to her son. So I called the poem, the character name was Marjorie. And it's really about my journey. And the last thing that I talk about is Marjorie's poem, because she wrote me this poem. So when that happened, and then Mum died, and then we found out Mum, certain things that she didn't say. And then I found stuff out about other people. So once again, I went right back to being Oliver Twist. I'm in my 40s now. Like, what's life about? I couldn't find no joy in... I remember, I'm a jazz fan, right? Mm. And I used to listen to big bands, melodies. And then, for some reason, I started collecting Miles Davis. I went into the 50s jazz, which was very serious and studious. And then I discovered John Coltrane, and John Coltrane is a saxophonist. His music is what's called atonal. There's an album called Love Supreme. And if you're not into jazz, it's very hard because it's not melodic. Mm. I put it on and suddenly it made sense. Suddenly I realized what John Coltrane was going through. I started listening to, I remember listening to Bob Marley's Running Away. You're running and you're running, and I thought, that's me. I then listened to Ella Fitzgerald, and I started listening to the blues and jazz, and I just immersed myself in misery that had gone before. And then I realized, I'm not the only one that's going through this. Mm. But at the time, I couldn't escape from just what it meant, because all the most significant people are dead. Dad's dead, Mum's dead, stepdad's dead. I had a sister that died. I then discovered I was a twin, and my twin brother died at birth.
You discovered this in your 40s?
No, not in my 40s. I discovered it in my early years. Mm. But what was happening is I was depressed. I was really depressed. And I didn't understand it, because I'm saying, I've got a good job. And somebody pulled me to one side and said, you're a womb twin survivor. So what do you mean? So you're a survivor of twins. That you're only half of you came to life. You're half of one cell. When it leaked out that I was one of twins, there was a lot of harsh, brutal comments. But the interesting thing, it was only about 3 years ago that I gave my brother a name, because back in those days, when you stillborn, they just took the child away. So I'd lost my twin, I'd lost my mum, my dad. So I'd had all of this loss. So it was constant grieving. Yeah. There was no counselling. And by the time I was 40 and I was where I'm at, I felt I'd constructed a social persona of being confident, and I was intelligent. So the community and everybody else around me bought that. I was very funny, I was a clown. So I put the mask on. But behind it, I was like, I want to live. And my dad, to this day, I've never seen his ashes, because his wife, when she found out when he died, she just cremated him and moved. Mum never told me that. So I'm thinking, so suddenly, at the age of 40 plus, trust issues came back big.
Right.
I stopped trusting people. I stopped trusting black people, white people. I didn't trust nobody. And that affected relationships. It affected my relationship with my kids.
So there's a couple of things here, because I think it's important to mention, whilst all this time you are in this space of nothingness, depression, all surrounding your identity and family and stuff, you have a burgeoning career going on.
Yeah.
You have a career in criminology. Yep. That is taking off. You're being well recognised.
Yep.
In this development of your career, do you think now, looking back, you were still searching for you? Always,
always. It's a myth to think that you actually, Maslow talked to write, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't believe anybody actualized their identity. Your identity is embryonic. Mm. I'm now in my 60s, when I was in my... So your identity is shaped by age. But the void of a racialized identity, even to this day, still has those impacts. I ended up having to talk to a psychiatrist. Mm. because everybody said, Mark, you need to get help. Back in those days, they didn't have psychologists, psychiatrists. They were the ones that would medicate and section you. And he brought my father up. And I know it might sound strange, it must be quite comical, but when you have a therapy session, it lasts 50 minutes. Well, he must have mentioned my father like 49 minutes. The moment it hit 50 minutes, he goes, right, that's it, come back next week. So I'm like, what? I said, can I stay for another 10 minutes? He said, no. It was raining. Come out of the hospital, big hospital in Birmingham. I'm on my knees in the car park, drenched, bawling my eyes out. So I went through psychiatry, didn't work. Through psychology, didn't work. And so my delving into the literature and the music, that was the only way that I kind of, because what I realized is that I had white people trying to explain my identity, black people trying to explain it. I had everybody trying to explain it, but nobody actually explained it to me in a way that I understood. So when you're sitting in a room when you're 40, feeling what you felt like when you was 5, it's very hard as an adult when you're going through those adverse childhood experiences. So I rejected it all. So therefore, the next part of the journey is I needed to heal. But what I at first had to accept is I wasn't responsible for what happened. But by that time, like you said, it was, yo, Martin, it was jail, it was books, it was TV. So what I realized is, you know, Public Enemy said, don't believe the hype. I believe my own hype. I had to become this person that everybody said I was. That's why when you ask me about, do I relate to my work? Because I feel that's my persona. That's not me.
Let's talk a bit about that, because in recent years, conversing with you, I've come to realise a couple of things, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is definitely age playing a factor into how you see things now. Yeah. And this I want to say demystifying this persona that you're describing, because everyone knows you as Dr. Martin Glynn, you know, criminologist, PhD, blah, blah. But I feel as though these years in your life, more recently, you've kind of been steering away from that.
I don't like it. I mean, I think you've been quite nice about it. I hate aging.
You hate aging?
Yeah, I hate it with a passion. I love it when somebody comes up to me and said, you know, 60 is the new 50 or something, whatever people say. But there's reasons I don't like it, because suddenly at the age of 60 plus, I found myself just being me. You know, I find pleasure in foxes in my back garden. I find pleasure in nothing, simple things. But I've got it to the age of 60 plus. And it's almost like I've had about 50 years of my life wiped out by this trying to deal with a sense of identity, dealing with what I feel. And I've arrived at a point when I'm finally thinking, you know something, it's all right, just to, you know, and then suddenly there's a deep resentment, because I said to someone the other day, I'll be 70 in 6 years' time, and they said, you? Because the other thing that's happened is my genetics means that people don't associate me with being 64. So now, what I realize is internally, the aging process kicked in quite severe. You know, 4 years ago, I got diagnosed with an enlarged prostate. My eyes are starting to deteriorate, so I have to wear glasses. Vitamin D, everybody will talk about black people in vitamin D. What happened in my case is that as I'm getting older, my bones are shrinking, so my teeth are falling out. So I've had 2 wisdom teeth physically come out because my gums are shrinking because of vitamin D, pushing my teeth out. So I'm starting to have an awareness of the physicality of aging and how abrupt it is on somebody like me, balanced against, I've created this Frankenstein monster.
All this time, I would say the last 3-4 years, and we've spoken, I had the impression that you didn't like aging, but I didn't have the context. And it's not till recent conversations I've understood a little bit more. But today, you've really opened it up. And what I got from you just now was that you are finally at a place where you're happy with you, but it's taken too long to get there. And you wish you would have got there sooner, so that you could have had those earlier years where your age hadn't kicked in the way it has,
And
to enjoy it.
And I'm having to deal with the resentment of pursuing a journey which has been the Wizard of Oz. You get to the end of this journey and there's just a little guy playing the organ. 40 years, I started out all these years ago thinking I'd make a difference. But it wasn't the difference I anticipated. And so you have to manage and come to terms with, like Tupac, you did what you set out to do, and that's it.
Two things then. First thing is acceptance.
Yeah.
You're struggling with that?
Always struggling with acceptance because, once again, I don't have a benchmark. I don't have the things around you that reinforce that. I've got distance relationship with siblings. Yeah. All my closest friends are apart. One of the saddest things for me is I left Nottingham 30 odd years ago. So all of my major achievements have been away from Nottingham. So when I've gone back home, there is no real awareness of those achievements. And in Birmingham, people don't have an awareness of my first 30 years. So I'm constantly, I go back home and it's the same as it was when I was growing up. And in Birmingham, they only know the persona. And what happens is, the moment the work that you've done and what you get known for changes or disappears, then all of those things go with it.
So the relevance, it's fleeting, I suppose.
Well, it's like fame, anything. That's why I said to you that I think people who are well known, they're always kind of, people say they're being humble, but it doesn't last. It really doesn't last. But what happens is, and it's like, again, another favourite book of mine, The Portrait of Dorian Gray. So a guy sells his soul to the devil and he has this portrait, and the portrait ages and he stays young. And I kind of feel very much related to that people they want to keep you in a particular point of time. Yo, Martin, remember you used to play cricket? Yo, Martin, remember you got your PhD? They're always going to do that. And I get that. That's nostalgia, that's memories. That doesn't help me age. Because when I say I got a prostate issue, everybody walks away. When you say, I feel this. So part of the aging process, and why I do a lot more comedy than I used to do, is because I've finally got to that age when I can be outrageously funny, because I can talk from a self-mockery perspective. I remember when I got diagnosed with an enlarged prostate, I did a comedy show, set up a comedy show, because I was tired of going to these meetings and seeing people talk about it in a very, stern way. But I've had a lot of procedures. But I remember when I did the comedy show, the first person I put on the slide is Bear Grylls. So I wanted to test how intellectual the audience was, because I'm doing comedy and it's about laughter. I said, why do you think I put Bear Grylls up? So people think I'm Picasso. Well, because he's an explorer. I said, no, because he's probably one of the few people in this country that hasn't excavated my bottom. That's what I was saying. And the whole place burst out laughing. And somebody turned around and said to me, why, you got a prostate issue, can't you take it seriously? I said, I'm 60 plus. Now I'm at this age, I find pleasure in just ranting about harmless things, you know what I mean?
You've recently got married, well, in the last 3 years?
3 years.
3 years. And I remember us having that conversation and you talking about how almost bizarre it was for you to be getting married and receiving love and having an unconditional love.
For me, the thing is, I was like the original serial avoider. Youths used to come up to me at university and say, yo, Mike, I've got a problem with relationships. I said, I can talk about bad relationships. I can't talk about, I said, if you ask me what I'd love to have been married for 55 years and just had one person. Anyway, my now wife, what would happen is, and this was for about 3 years, she used to say yes to the dress. And there was another wedding program, but I remember say yes to the dress, and for no more than 3 years. And she's not the kind of person that would say, I want to get married. She's not one of those kind of people. She just used to like the program. But I'm a man, typical, this is where I realized when you have to accept your things as a man. I walked past, so I'm thinking, she's watching, she's trying to tell me something, but she's not saying it. It went on for 3 years. But I noticed she just had this look when she was watching. So I said to her, what is it about? Because I said, I don't understand this. Why? Because people say, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So I said, we've been together a long time. She just looked at me, she goes, I'm not talking about marriage. I like the dress. I said, well, what is it? She says, I can't say what it is for you. And then she just run it past me. She goes, let me tell you what, she says, look, in my humble opinion, and she just gave me this checklist, right? And everything that she gave me on that list is the thing that I was fearful of the most. Every single thing. Commitment, love. The list was about a dozen things. Being together, doing stuff together, for richer, for poorer, that was like everything that I was scared of. And what I realized is, I thought, you know something, this is mad. I'm still scared. And I just went to her one day, I said, you know something, I can't do this anymore. I said, look, let's get married. Now, this is no word of a lie, right? So she said, you do realize we've got no money. Anyway, I told my brethren in Birmingham, I said, look, get married, I got no money. Put the word out. Actually, the whole wedding, sound system, cake, food, boom, everything. Community paid for it. Black studies, I was teaching the students. They did the wedding as part of black studies. Anyway, I got up in the morning, I was shaking. And my brethren said, Mike, let me help you put your tie on and your suit and stuff. So I had to be helped with my clothes. And I saw my wife come out. And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I used to see adverts for Ready Break, and there was this glow. She come out, I couldn't believe it.
To me, I'm listening to this and I hear love, I hear community, I hear acceptance,
Yep.
I don't hear rejection, I don't hear otherness, I don't hear void. And I'm in those moments where you were shaking and you couldn't speak and whatever, was that the moment, were you realizing that at that time, that actually this is my tribe, finding I belong somewhere?
Because the following week I became severely depressed.
A week after getting married?
Severely depressed. I mean, for one simple reason, it's the same thing that you said. Because I just said, I don't deserve this. And it's like, because I couldn't believe it. I could not believe that people bought gifts and this and that. And I had a meltdown because I said, this can't be real. I nearly sabotaged it because it's like, nobody's ever done this. So what I realized is all of the weight of my past was the elephant in the room, which meant that the wedding reminded me of everything I always wanted that you just talked about, that was denied to me for most of my life. And I waited till 60 to get married. When if I had a different start or I was a more secure person, I would have done that 30 odd years ago. Because to have that feeling in that way, I'd never had a feeling completeness. I'm not going to lie, all my accolades and everything I've ever done in my life, which is numerous, but that day was probably the most complete feeling. And if I never ever had it again, I know what it's like. So I felt that I only became a man when all of my kids and everybody was together to witness a commitment that was nothing to do with a book or a TV show or a car that I drive. It was something simple, like saying to someone, for richer, for poorer, at a time when marriage is being this, that, and different. So it was never about the institution of marriage. It was about me finally taking some responsibility for something bigger than me. It was just something like that. And in doing that, I became in the center of my universe, where I was always on the outside of it looking in. Now I'm in the center looking out. And on that basis, when I said I'm going to retire, I'm not retiring from life. I'm retiring from academia. I'm retiring from, if there's no love, no adventure, no fun, I'm not doing it.
You are a renowned criminologist, an author of a number of books, a playwright, a writer, a poet. I'm giving you them even though you're disconnected from them. And even though you have somewhat changed your own outlook through your journey, as we've talked about today, you have still left a legacy on your social corner, on your area and sector of work, your bodies of work and influence. How would you like to see, and I'm thinking of your retirement as well, how would you like to see your social corner evolve in the next 10 years?
There's a few things. I'm the writer in residence at the National Justice Museum, and one of the things I'm doing is taking a commitment to train the next generation of social historians so they can uncover the past. That's one. My books is a legacy there. But actually, I've said to people, because people ask me, I've got friends who say, yo, Martin, when you're dead, you know, it's like that. So I said to them, so it was a serious conversation because I'm at that age. So I had to think about that. What is the real legacy? And what it's about is quite simple, is that three, it's not word, but the three, one letter and two words. I was here. Because I got a great grandson. I want to be remembered. I want to be remembered for someone who has reinvented himself more than enough, who has been very honest about what he's been through. I was talking to my wife and we were talking about this. I said, I don't want people grieving. I don't want people getting upset. I'm fortunate. I'm one of the few people probably in the world that set out and done everything he set out to do, other than just now got to live. But I see myself, what I would say to the public or people in power, don't hide my past. That's why this project's important, because it's in my past you can navigate a new future. And for me, what I suffered from is all of my past, personally, professionally, culturally, was hidden. And I had to go and find it. Well, imagine if our young people could find out their past quicker, then you wouldn't end up like this.
What do you want them to be like? And I say that's because the question I
want
asked
them
you
to
was,
be open,
how do you want it to evolve?
Open, transparent, embrace love, embrace the opportunities that are there, don't push people away. And more importantly, when you look at yourself in the mirror, look at yourself. I didn't. I never looked at myself till I was about 12, 13. I just couldn't stand looking at myself in reflections, and I couldn't do it. I would do anything to do that. So that when they look at their self-concept, when their mum says, like, you've got a beautiful smile, they can see it. And I'm not going to be idealistic by thinking society is going to do that, but we can do this through the power of TV, whatever mediums. The mediums now, because if you can influence somebody to go and kill, like on a drill track, then you can have the converse, which increase the potential to love. So for me, we need an institute of love, where every film, every track, I mean, at uni, with my students, I say, has anybody had a relationship breakup? And they'll go, yeah. And I play Boys to Men, End of the Road. And they go, and you realise, because I loved him. But people go, I love tea. You know, we all say, but to practice it, it's 24/7. And I've spent a lot of time in my life not loving because I've been distracted elsewhere. And right now, it's about love. That's it.
Dr. Martin Glynn, thank you so much for joining me on the Social Corner.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Right, you look happy now.